This week on Cloud Security Lab a Week, it's time for our second stage check. Okay, if you go back about 2 months, you'll see our first stage check. And that was all focused on setting up our initial account and making sure that we did that in a secure way. From there, we started down the path of creating our organization. And we've now finished the foundation of our organization. So it's time to kind of zoom out and take a look at what we've done and review everything to try and put all the pieces together. And that's really what zooming out is all about. It gives us an opportunity to go ahead and reinforce concepts and make sure that all the individual little labs and lessons are tying together. So here's everything we did and why, and I'm going to go over to the whiteboard because I've got a cool diagram and we're going to walk through that and show you all the pieces. Where we were at the stage check 1 is we had our management account and we had enabled CloudTrail, and that management account was called S.L.A.W, if you remember. At the start of this, we created our organization, and the moment we did that, our original account, which was just called S.L.A.W, becomes the management account. So when we created the organization, a couple of things appeared. We had that organization root, so now we have a tree structure. We had the management account, and then from within organizations, we created an account called Security Audit. That was the start of building out the organization. In real life, organizations are incredibly foundational. It's something you're just going to use all the time. That's why it's so important for us to go over it and for you to understand how it works at a deep level. Then we went and created our first service control policy. Now that service control policy was called Protect Org and Root. But you'll notice I have it here pointing to, a bunch of accounts that it was applying to. In reality, when we originally created that, we created that service control policy and that applied to the organization root. Now it wouldn't actually protect the management account because service control policies never protect the management account, but it would protect everything else under that root. And at that time we had a security organizational unit that we created. And remember, an organizational unit is basically a folder for accounts and other for accounts and other OUs. And the reason that those are so important is we can apply our service control policies at those organizational units, and that really helps us define out a hierarchical security strategy. So we applied that original Protect Org and Root to the root. So the security OU inherited that, and then our security audit account inherited that. And that service control policy was all about making sure that nobody could use the root account and that you couldn't make the API call to leave the organization. That's a very important one. You're going to use that in real life all the time because when we create all of these other ancillary accounts, they're not ancillary, all of these other accounts in our organization, we're not actually setting a root password. We're not setting MFA. And that would be a laborious process. Like I have a couple of hundred accounts myself, and managing all those MFAs would be ridiculous. So we use the service control policy to make sure that that root account can't do anything. After we went and got all of that set up, we did a series of 3 labs where we took CloudTrail and we wanted to move those CloudTrail logs into our log archive. Oh, wait, we didn't have a log archive yet. So at that time, it was called Security Audit. To do this, we went into our security audit account. And by the way, as a reminder, these service control policies are what we call organization-based policies because they work at an organization level. And within our security audit account, we set up an S3 bucket and we protected that with a resource-based policy. It's called a bucket policy. And so we have our identity-based policies, our user-based policies that were the IAM policies that we set in our first labs. Then we have an organization policy, which is the service control policies. And then we learned about those resource policies for that S3 bucket. And what this whole process we did was so that we could take those accounts and get them out of our management account. You don't want anything running in the management account that you can avoid. You want everything to be outside of it. The management account has deep permissions and rights to do all sorts of stuff and run your entire organization. The last thing you want to do on the face of the planet is run like a live workload or have people going in and out of your management account all the time. So we're on the path of minimizing how much we need to use that management account for. So we took those CloudTrail logs and we pointed CloudTrail to that S3 bucket in the security audit account. But later I decided that I didn't like that name because really I actually used the wrong name in the lab. I made a mistake. It was fine. Some people do call it that, but much better would be the log archive. So we actually learned how to do the root account recovery. So the root user account recovery. And that's a process, again, that you're going to need to use at times. There's some things you need to use the root account for. And so you have to be familiar with that entire process of how you go and recover that the root user accounts. So we did that root account recovery, and then we changed the name of security audit to be log archive. And then we created a new account called security audit. And that was all just learning that process, how to do the account recovery, how to go inside. Now, I did skip a step. If you do the written version of this, I actually got it in the right order. Before we did this, you'll notice that to do the root account recovery, we have to log in as root. This SCP would block that if it was applied up at that org root level. So what we did is we actually moved that SCP, that service control policy, to apply to everything except that exceptions OU. So we accepted that one that has no policies attached to it. And that means that we're going to actually use that in real situations. You do want to have an OU with no SCPs on because sometimes you do need to do changes and access your root account, or a lot of the other SCPs we're going to apply are going to lock things down. That exceptions OU becomes an important tool for us to be able to take the account. And what we did is we took our original security audit account, we moved it into the exceptions OU. We had already moved our service control policy and applied it to all of these folders individually. When it was in the exceptions OU, we did our root account recovery. And then when we were done, we learned how to do this in a secure way. We threw away that password so we wouldn't have it. And then we moved that back into that security audit OU. So let me erase some of these things here because it gets a little bit messy if I have it all listed out. So that's how we were able to get our logs in log archive. It was originally security audit. We changed the name to log archive, but we do need a security audit account. We'll be using that later. So we recreated that account. That helped us learn a couple of key principles: how to move service control policies around to have different effects based on the folders, and then how to move the accounts around so you can actually instantly change the protections that are or are not on those accounts. All right, so let's scroll back up a little bit to the top here. And again, there's a lot going on here because we have now also built out all of these additional organizational units. And we talked about this. This is very much the kind of a structure you will use in a real large enterprise environment. I didn't make this stuff up. Some of these are ones that I've used, but I also took a lot of information from other industry experts and Amazon talks and Amazon's recommendations. So this structure here is a very versatile structure that if you wanted to use it, it'll scale up to the biggest Amazon deployments that are out there. Once we got all of our organizational units all set up, we had our service control policy in place. The next thing we did is we focused on identities. And so we turned on the IAM Identity Center and we moved into Federation and we created our first single sign-on user. Again, this is exactly what you will do in real life. You're going to rely on Federation. You're not going to create individual IAM roles yourself in every account necessarily. You're not going to create IAM users for sure. And in an enterprise environment, you could have something like, Okta or Ping or Azure. I won't go there. That's actually where your users all live. And AWS IAM Identity Center would be the way to get your Okta users all in AWS, and then that gives them access to all of the accounts. And in our case, we use that. We only set up 2 of our accounts initially. It's not hard to add all of our other users, but at this point in time, the accounts that we can get into are the security audit. Actually, it might be log archive. I might have that wrong because of the name changes. And we use it to go into our management account. And then we threw away our we didn't throw it away, but we're not going to need that admin user that we created and we're using for the first big chunk of labs. That doesn't mean that admin user is one that we will never use again. In my case, it was our mogul. Of course, this user is also our mogul. But It doesn't mean we aren't going to use it again, but it is not a priority for us right now. That's a backup in case something breaks with Identity Center. It's not one we're going to use day to day. All right. Ooh, I got a typo here. I said loogs. That should have been logs. I'll leave it at that. Not going to fix it while I'm sitting here recording a video. Once we got all of that set up, so now we have this is great. This is really cool. So we have our big, long structure of all of our organizational units. We have a few more accounts all in our security OU. We learned how to do a root account, user recovery, and we learned how to move service control policies around and use those to change the defenses, to change the security that's on any of these individual accounts. The last thing we did in this block of labs was a region lock service control policy. That's another one that's really common. And one of the reasons I put that one in there is we learned about the double negative, that whole concept of a deny and not action, and how those pieces tied together. And that's a very important construct that we're going to use a lot in writing resource policies, org policies, service control policies, and our all the different IAM policies. We put that one on the org root. You'll notice there's a little flaw in here that it doesn't apply to exceptions. That's okay. I'm doing that deliberately at this point in time. When we need to deal with other regions, we will change this and we will work in other regions. But that's one I actually wanted to have in an enterprise environment. You wouldn't do it that way. But for our labs, I'm doing it that way. Why? It's going to prevent screw ups. It's going to prevent accidental billing. If you make a mistake, it's going to really keep things a little more under your span of control. It also means some of the security controls that we're going to deploy, we don't need to deploy everywhere. We can go ahead and focus those on just a couple of regions because there are a lot of ones that are region-based that are tough to deal with otherwise. Okay, that's it, everyone. We zoomed out. I hope you are getting a better idea of the big picture. We have a really solid foundation that we've built here. We have a good structure with our organizational units, the same that you can scale things out with. We have federation set up for our identity. We have our logs going into a log archive account. We learn how to use a lot of different things like resource-based policies and service control policies. And we basically have learned the real fundamental elements of how an organization works. That's it for now. And when we come back, we're going to start jumping down, doing more of pulling things out of that management account. So we should need to use that less. And we've got a bunch of other nice, interesting things we're going to get into. Then we'll start getting into individual AWS services. So we're almost done with all the core security stuff. And then we get to start actually learning how to do from the shared foundation. We're going to move into actually using various services in a secure way. That's it. It's a lot. Have a great week. Enjoy the break where you don't have to do any other lives, except those of you that fell behind. Come on, catch up, folks. Get it done.